My name is Silas Merrick. I used to be a fighter pilot, one of the few trusted with the power of an F-15E Strike Eagle, flying at the edge of what a body can handle and what a soul can bear. I spent years in the air living inside a cockpit more than my own home. There was a time I thought I'd never give it up, that the sky was the only place I could breathe. Now I live on the ground, a small house just outside Livingston, Montana. Nothing special. A porch with peeling paint, a fireplace that hisses when I finally give in to the cold, and enough space for two people trying to start over. I traded the roar of jet engines for the hush of wind through pines and the quiet crackle of old floorboards under bare feet. Most nights I sit at the kitchen table with a pen in one hand and Lena's laughter echoing in my memory. Lena is the reason I stopped flying. She's 8 now, sharp, quiet, and far too perceptive for her age. I see so much of her mother in her face, but the eyes, those are mine. Watchful, tired. She doesn't ask why I left the Air Force. I think she knows without needing to hear it. There are days the silence here feels like a blessing. Other days it's heavy, a weight that presses into the spaces I don't talk about, especially at night when the house is still and my mind drifts backward. It always comes back to that day. The day I came home early from deployment expecting to surprise my family, and instead found something waiting for me that I never saw coming. I grew up in a house where silence wasn't peace, it was control. In Georgetown, our home was a mansion with marble floors that echoed every footstep like a warning. My father, Senator Royce Merrick, ruled that place with a voice that never needed to rise. One glance from him could empty a room. He was respected by his peers, feared by his staff, and praised in headlines. But to me he was a shadow I couldn't outrun. He never raised a hand, never needed to. Expectations did the work for him. He once told me when I was 9, "You're a Merrick Silas. You don't get to be ordinary." And from then on, I knew what was required. My posture had to be perfect at campaign dinners, my handshake firm but never aggressive. Every word I spoke was weighed even as a child. If I cried, I did it alone. If I failed, I did it quietly. My mother tried to soften the edges. She'd come to my room late at night and tuck me in with a whisper of old lullabies from her childhood in Vermont. But she was a ghost in that house, always present, never powerful. Her love was the kind you carried in your pocket, not the kind that shielded you from storms. Then there was Corbin, 3 years younger and somehow weightless. He had the kind of freedom I never tasted. While I was in Latin classes and debate clubs, he was in art studios and music rooms. Our father called it indulgence, but he let it slide. Corbin wasn't the heir. I was. I didn't hate Corbin. He was kind to me, always trying to make me laugh with his sketches or silly songs. But there was something inside me that ached when I saw how easy things came to him, how he could breathe in that house without needing permission. The weight of our family name rested on my shoulders alone, and even then I knew I wasn't built to carry it forever. What I didn't know was that one day Corbin would be the one who made everything collapse. I applied to the Air Force Academy the same way I did everything in my youth, quietly, precisely, and with no expectation of approval. I didn't tell my father until the acceptance letter arrived, sealed in thick white paper, the crest shining like a promise. He read it once, nodded, and said, "Good. Just don't embarrass me." That was all I got. No handshake, no pride, just an order as if this too was for the Merrick name. But for the first time in my life, something wasn't for him. It was for me. I didn't want to become a politician or a strategist or a polished heir to a legacy I never believed in. I wanted altitude, velocity, silence that came not from fear, but from wind screaming past a canopy at 30,000 feet. When I arrived at the academy in Colorado Springs, I could feel the pressure immediately, not just from the altitude, but from the whispers. Senator's kid, they called me. The one who got in through connections. They didn't see the years I'd spent studying under dim desk lamps, memorizing flight specs while others slept. They saw the name stitched above my heart and decided they knew everything. I kept my head down, ran harder, studied longer. I didn't complain. I didn't explain. Every push-up, every test, every simulator session was a fight, not to prove something to them, but to myself, that I belonged, that I could fly on my own merit. I met people who didn't care about my last name. One of them was a lanky Texan named Dean, who became my roommate and in many ways my first real friend. But even then, the shadow of who I was supposed to be followed me through every hallway. Still in the cockpit, even the whispers couldn't reach me. Up there, it was just me and the sky, and for a little while that was enough. Until the day I met her. Her name was Annalisa, and the first time I heard her speak, I forgot where I was. She stood at the front of a small classroom teaching a seminar on stress management for cadets, her voice clear and calm, not loud, but commanding. She didn't quote manuals or rely on charts. She told stories, real ones, about pilots who froze mid-flight, who came back home and couldn't sleep, who never said out loud what haunted them. She didn't soften the truth, but she spoke it with a kind of grace I wasn't used to. After class, she called me over about an essay I'd written, something personal about my grandfather and what flying meant to me. "There's more you're not saying," she said, not accusing, just observant. And for the first time in a long time, I wanted to say more. We started talking after that, first in passing, then over coffee, then over long walks along the academy trails when the world felt quieter. She asked questions no one had ever asked, not about my performance, but about how I coped with silence, about what it felt like to carry someone else's legacy on your back. She was 2 years older than me, but never once made me feel small. In fact, she made me feel like I could be something more than what I was trained to be. The first time I kissed her, we were sitting on a bench overlooking the valley, watching the clouds move like slow ships across the sky. She leaned in, brushed her hand against mine, and it just happened. No grand moment, just ease, familiarity. It was the first time in my life something had come without a fight. And for once I didn't question whether I deserved it. I just held on, until holding on got harder. We married in the backyard of a rented house near the base in Arizona. Just a few friends, my mother and Corbin, with a nervous smile and a camera he barely knew how to use. Annalisa wore a plain white dress, her hair loose, her eyes brighter than I'd ever seen them. I stood in uniform, hands shaking more than they ever did in flight. Lena was born the following spring. Her cry cut through me like nothing else had sharp new alive. When Annalisa handed her to me, she whispered, "She has your eyes," and for a moment I believed I could be a different kind of man than the one who raised me. The early years felt like borrowed time. I'd deploy for 3 months, come home for 6 weeks, then leave again. Every departure pulled something loose in me. Every return felt a little less like stepping into a home and more like intruding on a life that had learned to function without me. Annalisa never complained. That was the first warning. She stopped asking when I'd be back. She smiled politely, said, "We're fine," when I called from across oceans, but her voice always felt like it was speaking from another room. I told myself she was tired. That motherhood distance and waiting were wearing her thin. I told myself it would pass. I missed Lena's first steps. I saw them later in a grainy video Annalisa sent from her phone. I watched it alone in my bunk, playing it twice. Then again, just to hear the sound of my daughter's laughter. It sounded like Annalisa used to. I kept flying, telling myself I was doing it for them, and I kept ignoring the part of me that knew I was losing something I couldn't name yet. It started with small things. A new perfume, one I'd never seen on her dresser before, floral and heavier than anything Annalisa used to wear. I asked once, half joking, "Since when do you like that scent?" She smiled, said I'm trying something new, and walked off before I could read her expression. She began wearing more makeup even on days when she never used to bother. She said it made her feel more like herself, and I nodded like that explained everything. I wanted to believe it did. She no longer asked when I'd be home. No more calendar marks or countdowns taped to the fridge. No guilt, no tension, just space, clean and quiet. I told myself it meant she was coping better, but something about that peace felt wrong. Corbin started showing up more. He said he'd moved to Helena, only a few hours north, to be closer to galleries and get out of the D.C. noise. He came by when I was on leave, talked with Lena, made Annalisa laugh with the kind of ease I hadn't seen between us in years. I told myself he was family, that I was imagining things. Lena clung to me before I left for each new deployment, her arms tighter, her goodbyes quieter. Once she whispered, "Don't stay gone too long," and wouldn't meet my eyes. I told her I'd be back soon, that I'd bring her something special from wherever I was sent. She nodded, but there was a doubt in her face I couldn't name. I started packing lighter, less gear, fewer photos. More than once I stood on the tarmac before boarding and asked myself what I was really coming back to. But I went anyway, because sometimes you convince yourself the world you built is still standing until the day you step through the door and realize it isn't yours anymore. I came home early. 4 months in the Pacific, and they cut the mission short by a week. I didn't tell anyone, thought I'd surprise them. I pictured Lena running into my arms, Annalisa stunned, smiling, maybe even crying a little. I bought a hand-carved wooden doll for Lena from a market stall and a silver bracelet for Annalisa that caught the light just right. I was ready to come home. I needed to. The house was dark when I arrived. Quiet. No porch light. I unlocked the door and stepped into the stillness bag slung over my shoulder, heart full of anticipation and unease I couldn't place. "Annalisa," I called softly. "Lena." Then I saw her. Lena standing at the end of the hallway in her pajamas, tiny airplanes dancing across the fabric. Her eyes widened, and for a second her whole body lit up. "Daddy," she breathed, running to me, arms tight around my waist. I knelt, held her close, overwhelmed. But then she pulled back and whispered, barely audible, "You need to hide. Please, Daddy. Mommy doesn't want you here." I froze. "What do you mean, under the bed?" she said, tugging my hand. "Hurry." I didn't ask again. Something in her eyes told me enough. I followed her to the bedroom, crawled beneath the frame, heart pounding like I was back in the cockpit waiting for the unknown. I smelled unfamiliar perfume, heard the front door open, high heels on hardwood, then a man's voice, low, too familiar. "Corbin." Their voices moved down the hall. I heard laughter, her laughter. I used to love that sound. Now it cut through me. "You sure she's asleep?" he asked. "She's out," Annalisa said. The door closed. I lay still, the floor cold against my chest, and listened to my wife whisper to my brother. Soft words, a touch, a rustle of clothes, and everything inside me shattered, not just from the betrayal, but from the quiet way Lena had tried to protect me, as if she'd been carrying the truth on her small shoulders for far too long. When I finally crawled out, I wasn't the same man who had come home, and I knew I couldn't stay. I didn't storm out. I didn't shout or break anything. I didn't even let them know I was there. I waited until the voices in the bedroom grew soft and steady, until I was sure they wouldn't hear us move. Then I reached for Lena, who stood at the doorway with her small hands clenched and her eyes wide and knowing. I took her hand and whispered, "Let's go." We slipped out the back door like strangers in our own lives. I called a taxi from the gas station down the road, told them Georgetown gave the driver the address of the mansion I once called home. Lena sat curled beside me in the back seat, her head on my shoulder, her breath light but uneven. "Is Mommy mad at me?" she asked almost inaudibly. "No," I said, swallowing the taste of blood in my throat. "She's just lost." At the mansion, my mother opened the door, her face pale and confused. She pulled Lena into her arms before she asked a single question. I told her everything in one breathless, shaking stream, the hiding, the voices, the betrayal. She didn't speak, just held my daughter like she was the only thing that mattered. My father came in from his study, still in his evening suit tie, loosened but posture firm. When I told him, he didn't flinch. "Are you sure it was Corbin?" he asked. "I heard him," I said. "Lena knew. She's been living in fear." He nodded once, sat down in his chair like we were discussing campaign fallout. "Then handle it quietly," he said. "No press, no drama. Don't drag the name through this." That was all. Not a word for Lena, not even a glance. I walked out of that room without responding. Not because I agreed, but because I knew what mattered couldn't be fixed there. I returned to Arizona the next day alone to do what had to be done. I found Corbin at a downtown cafe, leaning against a metal chair, with his sunglasses perched too casually on his head, as if nothing in his life had just torn someone else's apart. He looked up and flinched when he saw me, but stayed seated. "Silas," he started, his voice already full of apology I didn't want. I sat across from him and placed my wedding ring on the table. "If she's what you want, take responsibility," I said. "But you stay away from Lena." He opened his mouth, probably to explain something, maybe even to say sorry, but I was already standing. I didn't need his guilt. I didn't need anything from him anymore. Back in Arizona, I met with a lawyer the next morning. I didn't fight Annalisa for the house. I didn't want it. Every wall, every window felt like a wound. But I did fight for Lena, and I won. The custody agreement was quiet, uncontested. She didn't look at me once in court. I wondered if she ever would again. I turned in a request to be grounded from flight duty, citing mental fatigue and a desire for reassignment. The base commander didn't question it. Maybe he saw it in my face. Within weeks, I started training cadets in simulation at the academy. No jet engines, no sky. Just screens and silence and young pilots who still believed the sky could save them. It was the first time in years I wasn't preparing to leave. Lena and I packed what little we needed and drove north through desert and pine toward Montana. We didn't speak much on the way, but she held my hand while she slept, and that was more than enough. We arrived as the leaves began to fall. Montana gave us something we hadn't had in years, quiet, without fear. The house was small, tucked against the base of a ridge where the wind moved through the trees like breath. Lena picked her bedroom the moment we walked in, chose the one with the biggest window, said she wanted to see the stars at night. I told her I did too. We planted daisies in the patch of dry dirt beside the porch. Mostly she planted. I spilled too much water and got scolded in laughter. "You're good at flying, Daddy," she said, "but terrible at plants." I let her win every argument. Dinner was always an adventure. We ruined the first 3 batches of pasta together, stood over the stove pretending we didn't smell the burn. She told stories while I stirred her voice, full of the joy I thought I'd lost in her. At the academy, I kept to myself. The cadets didn't know much about me, just that I flew once and now I taught. A few whispered. One left a note once. "You don't talk much, sir, but we know you've been through something." I never responded. I didn't need to. On a quiet Saturday, Lena brought me a drawing. It was a plain, rough lines colored sky and 2 stick figures below it holding hands. "That's me and you," she said. "We're watching it fly." I looked at the page for a long time. My throat closed around something I didn't know how to speak. "I love it," I told her. She smiled proud, then ran off to fold another paper airplane. That night I sat on the porch, her drawing beside me, the mountains shadowed in twilight, and I knew for the first time I had truly landed. It was family day at Lena's school. She tugged on my hand that morning, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders, her voice full of determination. "You have to come," she said, and I didn't argue. I never did when it came to her. The school was bright with color banners drawn in crayon classrooms, filled with folding chairs and mismatched cookies on paper plates. Parents chatted in corners. Kids darted past in loose lines of laughter. I stood in the back, keeping to the quiet edges of the room while Lena disappeared into her class. When it was her turn to speak, she walked to the front, holding a small sheet of paper creased in the middle from how tightly she'd folded it. Her teacher asked her the prompt, "What do you want people to know about your family?" Lena looked out at the crowd. Then she found me. "My dad used to fly really far," she said, her voice small but steady, "really high. He flew in places I've never seen, but he came back, not because he crashed, but because he wanted to live with me. I didn't know how to breathe." She smiled like it was the simplest truth in the world, like it wasn't something that had taken me years to understand. There was silence in the room, the kind that comes when a child says something too honest for adults to handle. I stepped outside, stood under the pale sun with my hands shaking, and let the words settle in. She wasn't wrong. I didn't crash. I didn't fail. I chose. That night, after Lena had fallen asleep with her arms wrapped around a stuffed bear we bought at a Montana fair, I sat at the table and opened my journal. The page stayed blank for a while, then I wrote one sentence. "I've landed. Not because I fell, but because I chose to stay." And that finally was enough.